that, we might as well record it and share it with the community.
Oh, for sure. That's a great time to like do that kind of stuff because you're like, you know what? A lot of people are going to get value out of this. Like, why just do it once when I could do it, 10, 100, 1,000 times? Cool, cool, cool. So, how are you feeling about today?
Feeling great. Happy to talk. Excited that we got a chance to go through all of this stuff.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Me too. I'm super excited about it. I'm just trying to get a couple things ready. While we do this, do you mind? Let's see. Got to figure out OBS. Um,
Looks like we are currently live on YouTube. I hear our audio coming through there as well.
yes, yep. We're live on there, and then I'm just kind of getting figure
Wait,
out
let's see.
OBS. Um,
Looks like we are currently live on YouTube.
oh, there we go. Cool. And I think we sound all right, so that's good. Um,
Great.
I won't really lift the lift the display thing until we're all ready to go, um, so people can s- hear that something's happening. But let me see real quick. I need to change something on my let's see, on my setup over here that isn't quite right yet. Oh, I don't know how to actually put this in preview mode, so people are just going to see it happen live. um, crap. Oh, there we go. Window capture.
Your video has disappeared from Zoom.
Oh, did it? Uh-oh. There, let's see. Oh, cool. Can you see me again?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay. I just need to. Oh my gosh, I can never remember how to use OBS.
Definitely a pro tool.
I know, right? I am not a pro consumer. um, there's some like fancy keystroke that you can do to do a crop, and I am not getting it. While we're waiting on this, would you mind doing a like a local recording of your audio? You can use QuickTime or anything like that to kind of. Usually, we just open up QuickTime and then um,
Alrighty. Yeah, it
do
looks
like
like
new
it's
audio recording.
catching. Cool.
Cool.
Yeah, it's running now.
I wonder if I
Let me
can.
just test that file, I guess. Lots of background audio.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious why that is. Let me try something on my end real quick. If I turn, is that all right? Did that change anything for you or no?
You don't have any background audio on your side. I have a lot of background audio on my side.
Interesting. I wonder why that is. Do you want to try maybe disconnecting and reconnecting to the call?
Sure.
Let's see if that does anything. Weird. I wonder why that is.
Do you still hear a bunch of background audio?
Yeah, I do. Odd.
How about now?
Oh, that cleared it up.
I turned Zoom's suppressed background noise from auto to high.
Oh, interesting. I wonder if do you have like a fan on or something like that?
Just my computer.
Interesting. It's so weird. Okay, cool. Well, that
Yeah, glad this helps.
yeah, that did it. That did it. We're good. And look at us. We're bringing it together. I found the little thing to actually like crop the video. So look at us. We're finally pro now.
Yeah, it's like we're tech people.
Slap this on my resume. I'm ready. It's so funny. Like, do you get that? Like I don't know if you get this with your family or friends or whatnot. Like, because you work in a technical space, they kind of assume that you're just like generally like good at tech stuff.
Definitely. My whole family though is like pretty with it.
Uh-huh.
My dad's an electrical engineer. My sister's also a software engineer now. So uh, we have that running in the family that it doesn't all fall on me.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. I know it's so funny. I mean, I can understand like from the outside like why it would like seem that, oh man, what is with my video right now?
Yeah, I just lost you.
Oh my gosh. I spoke too soon. I was too proud of myself for a second.
Yeah, you have some set timeout that just replaces your video. There you go.
Yeah. Should not be the case. Um, Man, it's all wonky too. Oh well. Maybe I'll just have to keep turning it off and back on again. Hopefully that doesn't get distracting. Um okay, cool. Well, hopefully that works, but you know, if it doesn't, we'll see.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah, fingers crossed.
I like your light in the background, changing colors.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. I've been I've been playing around with that. I've been like super dorky about all this stuff recently. It's been kind of a fun little adventure.
Nice.
Okay, so I mean, you know, it's like you're locked in your house and it's like there's nothing else to do except just like tinker with stuff, tinker with
Absolutely.
toys. Um, all right, cool. So I think we'd talked a little bit about what we were going to talk about, and I just want to verify it before we actually like, dive in. Um, let's see. Okay, cool. So I have some notes, and like the general arc is kind of like what we had talked about a little bit earlier, which is, you know, this is one of the we don't actually cover a lot of like React Native topics on the show, and so I think this will be like one of the first. We talked with shoot, I can't remember his name. We talked about Expo though, and all the things that they were doing with
Hmm.
Expo and whatnot, and so but that was the only other thing that we talked about React Native. So I was hoping that we just could just get like a high level overview of like the project, you know, what the team looks like, kind of what investment looks like at Facebook, etc., and then talk about the principles that you have written that post about, why now is kind of an important time in the project to actually establish those principles and all that kind of stuff. And I think just some of the stuff that you're excited to see as you've been kind of working with React Native, like what is kind of like renewed some of your interest in the project and excitement about it as like more people start doing stuff, more people are doing stuff with it. And, you know, we have, you know, you have partners like Microsoft and whatnot who are kind of taking it and using it for like really big stuff.
Absolutely.
Cool. And then is there anything that you want to talk about specifically that we should be sure to address from your perspective?
You've got it covered. I'm pretty excited about all of this.
Okay, cool. Um, yeah, I think if that's it, and it's pretty casual, just kind of like that's like the general arc. We might kind of like go roundabout in different directions and whatnot, but we'll hopefully that'll kind of, you know, last. And we shoot for about like 45 minutes of actual like, you know, podcast. Sometimes we go longer, sometimes we go shorter. Um,
Sweet.
and then one thing I might ask at the very end, depending on how much time we have left, is really just what you're excited about. So, oh my gosh, this is gonna kill me. Why is it doing that? um, is what you're excited about right now um, for like the near term future. So like, 1 to 3 years out. And I'm sure you have an answer for that, but I just wanted to warn you because sometimes it kind of this is infuriating. Okay, this is not going to work. Let me plug in a webcam. Man, that's so frustrating.
I can just kind of jump in with who I am and some about React Native if you'd like while you're kind of getting set up here.
Yeah, well, I want to catch that on the on air. So
Got it.
let's but you can, for the benefit of anyone who's watching right now, you could definitely we can repeat. That's fine.
Pete and repeat. Yeah. I'm Eli White. I'm one of the engineering managers on React Native. I've been on React Native about 3.5 years. Joined Facebook to work on React Native, and I've been able to do that for my whole time that I've been here so far. I have been working on a lot of stuff with across React Native. React Native's changed a lot over the last 3 years. It's had its ups and downs, and we're in a pretty good place right now. We've worked on I've worked on helping with quality of different products at Facebook, improving performance, uh, helping drive some of our open source communication and how we think about that. So that's kind of been my path. I'm sure we'll repeat all this for the podcast. So
Yep. Okay, video switch to. All right, looks less exciting, but I have a video camera that actually seems to want to work right now.
cool.
Good times. All right, it's gonna look funny. That's fine. Um, let's see. So that seems to work. I think I'm seeing myself on stream. That's good. And you have a recording going?
I'm pretty sure
Hey,
I
hey.
do.
Cool.
I do not. I Good check.
And then I'm actually going to hit record on our Zoom call so we can have those resources as a backup.
I do have an audio recording going now.
Nice. Awesome. Thank you. Okay. Cool. And if I look kind of like over here or down or start typing whatever, I'm not like on chat with somebody else. I'm just taking notes so that we can kind of have some links and whatnot available for people who check in on the show notes.
Absolutely.
All right, let's do it. Think we're working here. Took us a minute. Took me a minute. All right. So in 3, 2, 1. Eli White, welcome to React Podcast.
Awesome. Great to be here. Thanks.
It's funny. We have gotten to see a lot of each other, just kind of like talking about, React and React Native and what you are doing, but we haven't actually had you on the show yet. So I'm super excited to get you on to talk about React Native, the principles that you're using to kind of lead that project and develop it for the future. But for anyone who doesn't know you yet, could you tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, how long you've been doing it, and what you love about it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Eli White. I'm one of the engineering managers on React Native. I've been at Facebook and on React Native about 3.5 years. I had never used React Native before joining the React Native team. I come from a web background, so I'm came from the React side and worked on a lot of web infrastructure kind of things. So I have a lot of that background that I kind of bring to React Native. But I wanted to kind of coming into React Native, I wanted to take the things that I knew really well and apply them into an area that I didn't really know anything about, which was mobile and React on Native. So that's kind of what my path to React Native came from, and it's been really great kind of seeing this new area and working on mobile since then.
Yeah, so you mentioned kind of going from React to React Native, and I'm really curious, like, what were you building with React before, and how did that kind of translate to your work on React Native.
Yeah. So when I was working with React, I was helping a web team that build out a web property and a lot of the kind of web infrastructure side. So, working with setting up linters and uh,
Sure.
Webpack configs and Jenkins CI configs, all of that kind of stuff as well. And then coming to React Native, there's been a lot that's kind of transferred over. Uh, React Native is very similar to React on web. You write the same components. You have pretty much the same style properties that you're used to. Um, but the differences are that instead of rendering to DOM nodes like divs and spans, you're rendering to like native UI components. So
Yeah.
like the box components that are provided by uh, iOS and Android. Uh, and so there's some things that are kind of different that are helpful to kind of understand about mobile as well. Like navigation on mobile, for example, is like wildly different than navigation is on web. Uh, and thinking in that way is different. But the way that you build your UI, the way that you think about, how you nest components and build out things with uh, context or Redux, like all of that is exactly the same.
That is interesting because I think, I've been a predominant, I've touched React Native a little bit, but I've been predominantly a web developer like my entire career. And it's interesting, like it's an interesting challenge. Like when you go from web where you're working with, you know, you're working directly with elements, right? Like whether that be like, div, span, unordered list, or whatever, you're working like directly with those, and you kind of see those show up in the DOM as like the way that you put them in. But there's an interesting thing that happens that you alluded to in React Native, where you're using elements that sit above those native elements, so that they're like native in iOS, native in Android, and whatnot. So there's a level of abstraction. Is that predominantly kind of where like React Native sits as a project? Like, is it just like React and then like there's React Native is this mapping to those platforms, or is it more complicated than that?
Yeah, so one mental model that I kind of like to think about for React Native is React Native in a lot of ways is like a browser. The browser, like you write your JavaScript, but it is the thing that provides access to your webcam or to the other
Right.
kind of system devices. It provides those kind of APIs, and it also has the implementation of div and span, and all of those things are like built into the browser. And so it does its layout processing. It does how to process CSS and do all of those kind of things. That's all in the browser core. So React Native is very similar. That React Native takes the JavaScript that you write, but it provides the APIs that let you access native. It provides, it does its layout calculation itself. And instead of like a browser will just draw every pixel on the screen, but React Native, instead of drawing that itself, it renders to the actual native components. But React Native is kind of the heart and soul of specifying what you're able to use. And the thing that's nice about React Native that you don't get on the web is that on the web you can't add these features to your browser. You
Sure.
can't you can't expose new system capabilities into your browser. You have to wait for the browser vendors to do that. But with React Native in your app, you can add new capabilities. You can add new like connections between native and JavaScript and expose those so that you can use those. One example is like a map component in React Native. You might want to render a map, and on web, that's really complicated. You have to like essentially you like give up and you import some like Google map
Sure.
view that has done all of the logic to do everything. And on native, you're able to kind of import the Apple provided SDK for maps
Sure.
and use that in the app itself. Kind of as if the browser decided we're going to expose Apple Maps SDK as a component in the browser, but instead of having to wait for the browser vendor to do that, you can just do that in your individual app.
It's interesting because one of the big kind of, I guess, contentions or frustrations with the web is that it is a much less I don't know, like high fidelity platform than native platforms, so like a native like Mac OS or Windows or mobile like iOS and Android. They have a huge amount of like fidelity and responsiveness and APIs that let you do tons of things. Um, and so it sounds to me like when you're using React Native, you actually get to use these really high fidelity APIs instead of depending on, like you said, some big cluster of like, JavaScript or, Canvas or like whatever that kind of gives you that opportunity in the web, but like isn't actually like a native experience necessarily.
Yeah, exactly. And this actually ties into our first principle, which we'll probably talk a bit more later. Uh, but it's one of the things that's pretty interesting is that when you think about the different platforms between web, iOS, and Android, the the highest bar that users have for any experience on those platforms is on iOS. People have a really high bar of what they expect
Yeah.
the experiences on that platform to be, and it might be maybe upsetting to this audience, but I think for a lot of ways, web has the lowest bar
Yeah.
of the experience people expect, and so we get away with a lot of things on web. Uh, like we talk about trying to avoid janky animations, but like that's the standard is like janky animations, and we try to avoid that. But on
Yeah.
mobile, like a single frame drop in an animation is like not acceptable,
Sure.
and like people really hold you to that bar. And so for us on mobile, using a web view doesn't cut it. You can't get to the level of fidelity that people expect on iOS. And so it's really important for us that the experiences built on React Native really meet the bar that people have for that platform.
Yeah, this is a really interesting differentiator for React Native. I've always thought is that so many people want the ergonomics of JavaScript, HTML, CSS, and have just kind of put that into a web view on an application, and like it works, but it's like you're getting you you're getting the ergonomics, but then sacrificing the user experience. And it feels like with React Native, you've really tried to flip that, where you still want those like ergonomics of JavaScript, being able to have bring your web developers in and have them be effective in the product, but with the value of these native components that feel and look great and like predictable in those environments.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of getting to our principles, the reason that kind of a native experience is our first principle is because we will trade off developer experience to give people a user experience that is uh, what people expect for that platform.
So I do want to talk about the principles, but first I want to kind of like back up just a little bit, because I think we're going down that we're just barreling towards those principles, and I really want to get to those. But I want to ask, like, setting up principles feels like a really important part of a project. And I'm kind of curious. You wrote this article kind of detailing your 5 main principles for React Native, and I'm curious. Just before we go into those, what types of experience have you had leading this project that have that led you to want to redefine those principles or establish them, at this point in 2020?
Yeah. So I think React Native has had kind of a bunch of different kind of stages of its life. And when React Native was first announced, uh, React Native kind of came out of the gate saying like, we're a bunch of web engineers. We know how to build apps. Like, hey, mobile engineers, you've got this all wrong. Don't worry about it. We'll fix this for you. Like, don't do what you do anymore. Just like, be web engineers now.
Right.
And that was a big mistake on our part,
Mm.
because that's not how we felt. And I think it's really set the wrong tone. That I think a lot of engineers that are like really great native engineers, they see React Native in that mindset, and they see like these web engineers who know nothing about native, they know nothing about kind of what the expectation is of the platform, are coming in and saying like, we don't need mobile developers anymore, and
Sure.
that's not how we feel. Uh, and so we figured that it's really important for us to tell how we do feel and what our story is. And I think people have been able to kind of guess and talk about things, but it hasn't necessarily been aligned. And so instead of kind of responding to each individual person and saying like, that's not what we believe, and it's easier to get pulled into the trap of what we don't believe. And I really wanted to focus on what we do believe and the things that are important to us.
I'm curious about the nuance of how that actually manifests. Or like you mentioned routing a little bit earlier and how it's distinctly different, on the web versus native platforms. Um, Obviously, that was a challenge and something that you had to learn from native processes and engineering. But um, were there other things that kind of like rose to the surface as like challenges that really needed that clear lines of communication between kind of this React Native JavaScript type of experience, but then also back end, not back end, native knowledge and whatnot.
Yeah, I think there's a bunch of different things in this category. There's like people who have expertise on native, they know how to like debug native apps and improve the memory and be able to think about the life cycle of applications and kind of all the gotchas around that. How to set up CI and like for iOS and Android apps, as well as they really help maintain the bar of
Mm.
what the experience is on these native platforms. Like you have a bunch of iOS engineers or Android engineers, and they're going to not let you use React Native as an excuse.
Yeah.
Like we really want to make sure that people working in React Native don't say like, oh, we can't do this because it's React Native. And I think people kind of can fall into that trap. And I think it's easier on web because like you don't have any other choice. Like you can only do what you do on
Sure.
web. But I think one of the perceptions that people have with React Native is that you can do everything in JavaScript, and you can do a lot of things in JavaScript. But React Native doesn't mean JavaScript.
Mm.
One of the things that's really important to us is that you use native code when you need to. That isn't avoiding React Native for a certain part of the application. That is like a core belief of React Native that if you need to bridge new components or APIs or implement something natively because it's too complicated or too maybe confusing to have in JavaScript, or there's already existing code in native to do that. Using it in native is still React Native, and we want to encourage that.
That's really interesting. I imagine that there's a kind of perception too, someone who's investigating these things, thinking like, well, there's not like a React Native library for this thing, or it doesn't do exactly the way that I want to. Um, it seems like that experience is improved and I guess augmented by having people who are really familiar with iOS and Android and all the other platforms that you actually target, that they can actually now have a better space to work together than they did before, where it's just kind of like you have one team dedicated to one platform and that's basically it.
Yeah, exactly. I think it obviously depends on the scale and size of your company,
Sure.
but I think when people consider React Native, we don't want them to say like, oh, this means that we don't have to hire iOS and Android engineers. We just can hire our web engineers and we'll be totally set. I think maybe at you're starting a startup, you have two people. I think maybe that's fine. But I think as you grow, the way that we see it, and the teams that we've seen have the best success are teams that still have some native engineers, but the ratio of native engineers to people who have like a JavaScript background can be very different than it would be with just native apps.
Interesting. I'm curious, since we're on this topic, what does that look like at Facebook? You have, you have like the tippity top of, scale issues, right? And so I'm kind of curious, like, what does this look like at Facebook, using React Native? How is it being implemented? And I mean, as much as you can tell me, and kind of what do those handoffs look like between your teams?
Yeah, so on the product side, which might be most interesting to you, but push me in a different direction if it's not. On the product side, there people are mostly organized around features and products and not around platforms. And so you will typically have teams that go and build the same feature for all of the different platforms. And so by being able to have like shared knowledge or expertise, that helps a lot. People building this for web can also kind of build this on mobile. Uh, but we also have, the teams that do the best with React Native have a couple of native engineers on both platforms that can help in any of the places that they need to, bridging different APIs, thinking about different architecture for how things might be laid out. And so that's really what we see. One of the things that's interesting for us at Facebook is that we have a lot of different choices for how you can build your application. There's nothing prescriptive about which framework you have to use. And our native frameworks, ComponentKit and Litho, are actually heavily inspired by React. So even if you're writing iOS native code or Android native code, you're still working with components and with props and with a very similar mental model. And I think that's been really helpful as well, that engineers, native Android engineers can still have conversations about the JavaScript React Native application that's getting built on top of it.
That's really interesting. This notion of everyone kind of rallying around components, regardless of if they have a native framework or web framework or React Native that's bridging them. Because it seems like this whole concept of components, if I remember correctly, even started back in like PHP, like before React. There was kind of like this PHP model of a component, and that kind of migrated to what we know as React today. Has that been like an unmitigated success, for Facebook? Just the notion of components, or have there been some drawbacks?
I think components are everywhere. I don't think we really do much anywhere that isn't with that kind of mental model. I think that components have a drawback that isn't Facebook specific. It's shared everywhere, which is like we might have solved where behavior lives into these like individual components, but then finding the right components to use becomes the problem. Sure. How do you once you have all of these, how do you distribute them and communicate them, be able to make them findable? And so I think this is a problem no matter what technology you're in. This is one of the shifts to components that I've kind of seen. And so we have a bunch of tooling internally to help make this better, but it's not a solved problem as I've seen it.
Nice. Well, I really love the idea that you'd mentioned just a bit ago about how you have teams that work around a feature or like a product and actually try to bring that to the different platforms. I find that really interesting because it changes it flips the expectations around a little bit, where you would have someone who's maybe an expert in this type of technology and whatnot, and then you bring them in to do that part of the stack for that feature. I'm kind of curious, does that work really well? And is that something that smaller companies could model?
Yeah, so for Facebook, we have a lot of experts that are experts in individual platforms or technologies. But Facebook really values generalists that can kind of jump between anywhere. And so the experts can kind of help in the areas that they know and maybe provide infrastructure or tooling to make things better and make things that used to require experts be accessible to generalists. And that's kind of the way that we think about a lot of things. And I think that's actually part of React Native as a whole, is that mobile used to be only accessible to people with deep native expertise, but the up-leveling with components and with React Native as a whole has enabled this kind of thing that's required expertise to be done, the balance to be shifted a lot more towards generalists, supported by fewer specialists.
Yeah, I really like that. And I think that's something that I find, I think, interesting as an industry, that we're moving, it feels like we're moving closer and closer to product, where it's like we want to be able to like service customers as quickly as possible. And we're trying to build technology that allows more people, or like a wider spectrum of people to be able to deliver on those features faster and in more places. And it feels like React Native is one of those projects that's really like at the center of this.
Yeah, I think both React and React Native, we kind of see them as like one unit,
Yeah,
are very much at the center of this.
yeah, absolutely. So I'm kind of curious. Before we dive into principles, what are some of the what are the major platforms that React Native is really targeting right now?
Yeah, so React Native is a framework and a technology that transcends Facebook. So it's React Native supports uh, significantly more platforms than our team at Facebook supports. So it's kind of an interesting conversation. And I think both sides of this are pretty interesting. Facebook historically has only supported React Native on iOS and Android,
Huh.
but there's been other companies that have supported a bunch of other platforms, like Apple TV, and Microsoft has been driving a lot of work around Mac and Windows, and you have companies that build React Native for a whole bunch of different TV platforms and
Yep.
Roku and Tizen and all sorts of things. Um, it pretty much feels like if there's a screen, React Native runs on it,
Nice.
which is pretty cool.
Yeah. Okay, so I want to now. Now that we got kind of for anyone who's unfamiliar with the technology, we got kind of like the broad picture of the technology and how it fits in at Facebook, and how your team's kind of working to support more generalists. I want to talk about these principles that you wrote a really great article on, that are driving the current and future development of React Native, and I'm going to list them out right here so we kind of like know the pillars. Oh, do you have a question? Sorry, I see your
Yeah,
finger
I want
raised.
to jumping in when we're talking about platforms. I said that like React Native started with like iOS and Android and Facebook, but it supports all these other platforms. And I think we'll talk about this more at the end of the things that I'm excited about. But one of the things that we're doing now on our team at Facebook is partnering really closely with Microsoft to
Yeah.
support Windows and Mac. And we're building up a team to do that because we have products now at Facebook that are using those. And so I'll talk about that more at the end, but that's something that like our team at Facebook is now supporting these platforms as well.
That's awesome. That's one of the things that I've been most excited about, just kind of in hearing from you, is like all of the new places that React Native seems to be popping up, and all the new platforms that it seems to be servicing. And that one with Microsoft is particularly interesting, and I guess gives something for our listeners to look forward to in the next 15 minutes or so.
Yeah.
um, okay, so I'm going to read these principles off. They are from top to bottom. We have native experience, massive scale, developer velocity, every platform, and declarative UI. Now we've kind of touched on a couple of them, but I'd love to hear the kind of like principled version of these first. So let's dive into native experience. Could you talk a little bit about what native experience as a principle means?
Yeah. So in our blog post, which you'll link out in the show notes, the first paragraph for each principle is kind of the bite-sized, tweetable form of each principle. In fact, each one is of the length that it could be tweeted. So I think that's probably a pretty good place to start our conversations about these. So for native experience, our top priority for React Native is to really match the expectations that people have of that platform, kind of like what we talked about before. And this is why React Native renders to these native platform primitives. We value the native look and feel over cross-platform consistency. So this is kind of how we think about React Native, that the goal isn't like 100% code reuse. The goal isn't that you write one like piece of code and that will run on every platform, look and feel exactly the same across all platforms. It should look and feel like people expect of that platform. One of the ways that we think about this is that people don't have, like when people want to make a decision about an app, they don't compare that app on iOS and Android and any other platform to see like, oh, this is consistent, like this makes me happy. Right. Instead, they check whether that app looks and feels like other apps on that platform.
Right.
So if your app, scrolls differently or has different like bounce behavior or animations just feel subtly off. It doesn't matter if it's consistent with other platforms. What we believe matters is that it matches people's expectations of the platform that they use.
That's a pretty big challenge, I imagine, right? Because like, consistency with the platform versus consistency with, your experience across platforms, um, is is maybe a level of consistency that people aren't used to thinking about consistency at, right? Like it's easier to think of it as like this thing looks exactly the same everywhere versus this thing looks as its environment does on all of the platforms. Is that a challenging way to think about things, like or talk about them as you introduce React Native to people?
I think it is for people coming from web, and it really is not for people coming from native. Uh, because people coming from web, you're used to like building a website on a browser, and that experience on a browser should look the same no matter what browser you use.
Sure.
And when it isn't, you're really upset at the browser. But in this case, and that's because like you don't know which browser people use, and it's really interchangeable. But when you use a different native device, you're very much locked into that native device, and really know what that platform should feel like. It doesn't matter what it feels like on other browsers, other devices to you.
It is really interesting because, you know, at least with the developers that I've talked to, they hold very closely to the uh, interface guidelines for those platforms. Like it's very important to each person
Yeah.
that the experience match the surrounding apps as best as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you asked one of the reasons why we created these principles. And I think one of the things that's really helpful is that, there's a lot of different technologies in this space now with Flutter and Swift UI and Jetpack Compose and a bunch of different choices that people have, let alone web views, when thinking about these. And so the trade-offs that people often talk about are, maybe like performance or who created it. But I think that's not really the things that we really want people to think about. There are different trade-offs that are aligned with different goals, and we want to talk about the things that really matter to us to help you kind of understand if you're deciding between these technologies, which ones you feel aligned with. For example, I think like Flutter. I don't want to speak for them, and I haven't seen a post like this from them, but my understanding is that they don't have the same principle. That for them, it matters much more that the experience is the same across all platforms, not because they want the experience to be the same across all platforms, but they want the developer experience to be so great. They want you to be able to confidently write code and have confidence that it's going to work the same way wherever you write it. And for us, we kind of make sure that we tell everybody working in React Native at Facebook that you should be testing your experience on all of your platforms because they should behave like that platform. And so that's kind of a difference between these different technologies that I would love to kind of see a document of the principles from the other frameworks.
Yeah, yeah. And I think this really showcases your belief that, if it comes between a user experience and a developer experience, you're going to choose the user experience over the developer experience.
Absolutely.
Interesting. So I want to move on to the next one, which is the massive scale. And I guess I'll let you kind of like read the tweetable version of this, and we'll go from there.
Yeah. So the Facebook app is used by billions of people on a huge range of devices, and there's hundreds of screens in the Facebook app that are implemented with React Native. And so for our team, it's really important that we focus on the kind of issues that we see at that scale, which is kind of also saying that there's a lot of things that we aren't able to focus on because they don't cause us the biggest problems at this scale. Our team is only a certain size. We can't focus on everything. And so we have to kind of draw that line where we need it to. And there aren't that many companies that are really using React Native at this scale. If any company other than Facebook is even close. And so the things where we're most uniquely situated to solve are the things that we should focus on. And uh, as I said before, React Native is much larger than just
Yeah.
Facebook. There's a big community around it, a lot of other companies that operate at lots of other different scales. And so we want to enable other companies that operate at those scales to really focus on the things that impact them and provide that back to the ecosystem. And so as we think about, the APIs we provide and how we set up the community to be able to build third-party modules and kind of contribute, we want to help people contribute at the scale that they're comfortable contributing. But
Yeah.
for example, here, as kind of a difference in focus, um, if there's a issue that kind of comes up that is about like a specific prop in a certain way that we don't use it, um, the we are less likely to jump into that than we are to jump into disk utilization on Android, like low-end Android devices, really slows down React Native, and it requires like tons of changes in the core of how we
Hmm.
architect the whole framework to be able to address making React Native run better on Android devices. And so we try to focus on these bigger problems that will have the biggest impact for kind of the scale that Facebook operates at, and enable the community to kind of solve some of these other problems.
This is really interesting to me. I think one of the things that I have really enjoyed about using React is that I know that it's being used by Facebook. And so there's really nothing that, like, for any indie product that I make, or, things that I make with, significantly fewer users, like there's going to be some consideration for the problems that I might face, already baked into the framework. And I love hearing that, you're using it and understand and like build new solutions around the problems that you have at scale. But I think there's also another benefit to this, is that it sounds to me that, at Facebook, because people get to, choose their own tooling, you have to be a very adaptable framework. Like you have to be able to fit into the way a certain, platform or product is making those decisions, and you can't own the whole pie and be like, well, this is a React Native app, we're building it from, from first principles on React Native. How has that necessity kind of guided the way that you build out React Native?
Yeah, I think the biggest way to me is the way that we've kind of approached our community and our other partners. And I want to plug like Expo here a little bit.
Hmm.
Uh, for those that don't know, Expo is a kind of managed toolkit to create React Native applications with a lot of the capabilities that you need built in, and really focused on new applications. But they've also been providing a lot of their toolkit to existing applications as well, and really providing out like high quality uh, building blocks that people use.
Yeah.
And I think the interesting thing for us at Facebook is that we aren't spinning up new apps all the time. We have
Right.
like a couple of really massive apps that are that were existing native apps that we need to integrate React Native into. And so for us, we really need to be able to focus on those kind of problems. Uh, we aren't in the situation that we would be investing in, creating a way for people to spin up tons of apps and make that really streamlined. Because if we did, it would be kind of out of the goodness of our heart to build up our like developer community, but we wouldn't be able to invest in it and provide as much like success to it as the community would want. And so that's kind of an area where Expo has really stepped in
Yeah.
and made that really successful by helping teams kind of create new apps and make it really easy to get started. And so I think for us, it's more important to build our relationship with these companies and enable them versus trying to do it all ourselves.
Yeah. And I mean, I just have to kind of say that like the stuff that Expo is doing is really cool. It's been really fun to see like all of the kind of cross-platform libraries that they just make it really easy to get started and start using on, even on web. They have some like really great libraries that work on web.
Yeah.
Now, I know that this, working at this level of this scale has mandated that you kind of invent new tooling. And I know that some of the things from that article that have popped out of that are Hermes, Fabric, and Turbo modules. Could you talk a little bit about what those are and kind of like how they were birthed out of React Native?
Yeah. So the first one is Hermes.
Oh, is it?
I
Oh
think
my God.
the other name may have some trademarks around it.
Oh, gotcha.
Um, but Hermes is our JavaScript engine built specifically for React Native, and this is like a great example of uh, what it means for us to focus on scale. Because as I mentioned, like Android devices have slow disks, and our focus there is to serve the billions of people using React Native on Android in the Facebook app. And so there's only so much that we can do loading JavaScript off disk. And with an existing JavaScript VM, you have to load source code, the entire JavaScript bundle, and then parse it, and then compile it, and then start executing. And that also all has to happen on the startup of your application. And on web, you have browser tabs that are around forever. The
Yeah.
startup matters, but it also matters, like, can it still be fast after being open for a week?
Sure.
And that is not common on mobile, that you keep the same screen up for a week. What matters a lot is how fast you can start the app and switch apps and come back to it and get back right where you were. And so for us, we needed to be able to make it so that all of that work that's really common to a JavaScript VM goes away. And so for Hermes, that's really the main focus, is really optimizing for startup performance on mobile. And it's not a thing that anybody can do, creating a new JavaScript engine. This is not a fork of V8. This is not anything that exists. This was a from scratch JavaScript engine. And instead of parsing JavaScript, we compile that JavaScript to bytecode that is then directly executed off disk. And so there's no JavaScript source, there's no parsing, there's no evaluation.
Wow.
It is like actual bytecode instructions.
Man, that's so wild. And I think kind of ties into this whole notion of like that's something that like not Facebook could not have done. Right? Like you kind of have to be at a certain level to take on a project like that and actually optimize around that. Because I mean, I imagine that was a non-trivial effort by some very talented engineers for an amount of time.
Yeah, there's only so many JavaScript engine engineers in the world. Not just any company could hire that and even like be able to invest in that. Like we're able to invest in that at Facebook because it has such an impact on Android, where the Facebook app is so important. And I don't think any other company has the scale that would warrant that investment.
Yeah. Now, just out of my own curiosity, how did that come about with, I know that Apple in particular is very particular about the engines that run on its platform. And so I'm curious, like, did that infringe on some of their guidelines for that? Or were you able to work around them with success, or did you have to work with them to get this thing to work?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, Hermes is there to really solve our problems on Android and the disk on Android. And so providing as we built out Hermes is the Android JavaScript
Gotcha.
engine. And so the disk on iOS is much faster than it is on Android. That it's not as much of a problem there.
Interesting.
And so the focus has really been on Android.
Fascinating. So it's interesting to me because I didn't realize that that you're able to do that at even like a platform level, like create these so this is effectively just targeting Android and the limitations there versus iOS, which have, as you mentioned, faster disks and kind of can use the platform that's available.
Yeah. The impact on Android is much greater than the impact would be on iOS. I think these optimizations are still valuable. Like not parsing the entire JavaScript bundle is still like, it would only lead to wins. And so I think it would provide value. And I think CallStack has actually been working on bringing Hermes to iOS, and kind of investigating that and what kind of wins people might see. But our focus has really been on Android.
Interesting. Thanks for clarifying that for me, because I had no idea. Now, Fabric, that seems awfully close to Fiber in, like that we got in React a couple years ago. Are those two related?
Yeah, so Fabric and Fiber are kind of very similar in their missions and approach. Um, I don't know that many people remember React before Fiber, but React got to a certain point where they couldn't bring the capabilities and the optimizations that they wanted to bring on the architecture that existed, and so they kind of rethought the core of React without kind of changing the public API to be able to unlock these new capabilities in the future. And so we think about Fabric the same way, and we have a couple of different big architecture projects that we're working on to kind of address, similar to Hermes. We see these patterns that are kind of like problems throughout the stack, none of which is like something that you can fix that one individual problem. We have to fix kind of change the whole system. And so we've been working on this new architecture that will solve a lot of these kind of challenges that we've run into at our scale, while not requiring much changes on the product code side, trying to just be like an under the hood improvement that will unlock a lot of capabilities for us in the future.
Nice, nice. Now, were there any other things on the scale side of things that you wanted to cover before we move to velocity?
I think we should move on.
Okay, let's move on. We're getting too much into the weeds right now.
This is great. I love these questions. I'm really happy to be talking about the principles. I wrote this, and the main goal for this whole document was kind of sharing and being able to have conversations about it. This is a starting point, not a end point. This is what drives React Native, and we want to hear from other people how this lines up with their opinions and other technologies. And this is really about a conversation. So I'm glad we're having this conversation.
Yeah, me too. And I think that brings up a really valuable point is that I think sometimes people see, principles like this as I don't know, maybe being like restrictive or whatnot. And I am so glad that you mentioned that, because I think that being able to say what your values are, open up discussions, right? And you can kind of talk about like how something that you want is aligned with this principle or like unaligned with this principle, but that doesn't mean that you can't do it. It just means that like we got to kind of like rework it to like fit into these principles and these guidelines, because a project like React Native would just fall apart if you didn't have any guiding principles. I mean, there's just too many people who are interested in having it be tailored to a certain way, to just say yes to everybody.
Exactly. I think one of the other things that's interesting here is that these aren't the React Native principles. These are our team at Facebook's principles, the React Native team at Facebook's principles, because React Native is much bigger than us. Expo has probably different principles as they work on React Native than we do, and I think that's one of the things that's really valuable for our ecosystem, is that we're able to kind of support these other partners to have different principles. But we figured it was really important to share ours because we've been the one driving this project from the front lines for a while.
Yeah. And I mean, Expo is a really great example of, something that can be aligned, but have different principles and try to solve a different part of the problem that you're not allowed to. I love that. So developer velocity, that's the third of the, React Native team principles. And I'll read this one. This one says, it should only take a few seconds to see the result of a code change, or see the result of code changes. Talk to me about that one, because that one seems really big and hugely important for a company as big as Facebook, where 1 second for every developer that works on something is, hours a day.
Yeah, when you're running at our scale with the number of engineers that we have dashboards that measure how many years per day are spent running Yarn. Like when you can save a little bit of time from something, that really impacts a lot of people. And it's not just, we are driven by a lot of these things at Facebook, but by providing them to open source, we know that we're really changing the game for companies all around the world. If you're creating a startup being able to move fast and try a bunch of different ideas and iterate and find product market fit, that is incredibly important to you. And for us at Facebook, we have so much that we want to build on the product side, and so much to do, that if you can let a team do everything they're doing with half the number of people, that other half can take on bigger challenges and have a lot more impact. And so we really value developer velocity and making this easy.
Yeah. So what are some of the things that that have been introduced to React Native to make changes in development super snappy?
Yeah. So, I mean, a lot of what we're comparing against is mobile, which is, minutes build process after every change before you can see anything. And that's not what people expect from web. So maybe the listeners here are kind of a little bit skewed in that direction.
Sure.
But, we think about things like fast refresh, which came to React Native first, and really makes that save and reload experience really seamless. And it's not just about how long it takes to see a code change. It's not just about that refresh cycle. It's also about how fast you can debug problems and the tools that you have available. And for a lot of companies, it's about OTA and being able to ship kind of updates to your app on your own cadence instead of maybe on a weekly cycle. You can just kind of ship and it's live. And so that kind of is all like our thinking. Empowering those kind of changes is a really important part of React Native.
Yeah, and this is something that I think web developers like myself just have zero context for. When refreshes are pretty fast, even on a slow slow web app. But the deployment, like taking control of your deployment, it's like, for me, I just think like, oh, okay, like I'll push this in, and in a couple of minutes it'll be live on the web. For native, you actually have to get approval from like a different company. So
yeah,
how does so tell me a little bit, for those who aren't familiar, like what this life cycle usually looks like, and how React Native allows you to kind of bypass that whole thing.
Yeah, so for a lot of companies, they might have like weekly or bi-weekly release cycles for their native apps, because going through the process with iOS and with Apple and Google Play might be pretty complicated. And so one of the things that was really cool is that Microsoft built this system called Code Push, which essentially lets you ship like you're used to on web. You can just kind of publish a new version of JavaScript, and then the app will start up and download that new bundle and execute that instead. And I think a lot of companies are using this, having a kind of great experience with OTA. And it's I think for the companies that use it, like, it's not about shipping new features, but it's about being able to quickly fix bugs and notice you have a crash and be able to like resolve that crash right away instead of having to wait a couple of weeks for that to go through. And so it's been really cool to see like Microsoft having that stack, and Expo has theirs with an OTA update system. And I know like Shopify has been sharing some of the other things they've been doing, like on PRs, you can scan a QR code and it will download the bundle from that pull request and run that on the actual native application. And so those kind of things are not possible with a native application, and part of the release that is possible with React Native that companies are doing.
Yeah, I love that. And I love that that is something that the kind of website is able to bring to native platforms, that you can bring that particular experience of being able to just like push updates into your product without having this big like maybe weeks long kind of song and dance with with third parties.
Yeah.
So let's move into the every platform, because I think this is something that you're super excited about, and seeing the places that React Native has gone this last year. Tell me about this every platform as a principle.
Yeah. So reading the first paragraph here, when we introduced React Native in 2014, we presented it with the motto, learn once, write anywhere. And we meant anywhere. developers should be able to reach as many people as possible without being limited to the device model or operating system that people are running on. Uh, React Native isn't just, we talked about this already, isn't just about iOS or Android, but it's also about Windows and Mac and VR and game consoles and web, and it's about really it's about the way that people write UI and not about the platform. And I think that's something that we really believe in, is that React and React Native aren't like separate projects. A lot of it is really meant to be kind of very much the same. That the way that people write UI and the things that they learn should translate anywhere. And kind of React Native pushed a lot of this with what you're able to write, but we also now see this with influencing the way that people write even native products in terms of like the mental model being the same with Swift UI and Jetpack Compose and Flutter. And so for us on React Native, our goal isn't necessarily to have write once and run anywhere, but to have the authoring experience enable you to build really great experiences on individual platforms. So we've been doing that now with Windows and Mac at Facebook, as well as iOS and Android.
That's awesome, because I naturally think of, because when I was introduced to React Native, it was specifically targeting iOS and Android. But now you mentioned like this is going to desktop, to like different types of devices, to TVs and whatnot. Tell me a little bit about the partnership that you have with Microsoft right now, building desktop experiences with React Native.
Yeah. So when we open sourced React Native a couple of years ago, we never really thought about other platforms being a thing that we would need to focus on, because Facebook's so focused on our mobile apps on iOS and Android. And then Microsoft started using React Native. They realized that their developers want to write in JavaScript, and that model worked really well for them. And so Microsoft has been doing really amazing building out React Native for Windows and Mac. Some of the built-in applications that ship with every version of Windows now are written in React Native. So every copy of Windows includes React Native in it, which is mind-blowing. Some of the applications on Xbox itself are written with React Native.
Unreal.
Office, like the whole Office suite, has certain parts of the apps across all of the platforms that are written in React Native. It's become a really big thing for Microsoft, and they were kind of doing that on the side with like consultation and partnership with us. But now for us at Facebook, we actually have a use case for React Native on desktop. One of the things that's really important to us right now is helping people kind of connect even when they're remote from each other. I think that's really important and part of the mission here. And so one of the things that we've been building out is Messenger Desktop. And Messenger Desktop has been an Electron app, but there are some things that we want to do that aren't possible in an Electron app. There's a lot of limitations that it has. And so, we were investigating, like, do we build Messenger Desktop with like a native iOS and Android app? And the answer was like, this React Native for Windows and Mac thing works really well. Like this works out. And so we've been building up a team here at Facebook that I support that is building out React Native for Windows and Mac in partnership with Microsoft. And so we kind of operate like we are one team across both of these companies.
Wow, that's awesome.
We chat at least once a week. Engineers on our team should feel just as comfortable with engineers on their team as they do with other engineers at Facebook. So this has kind of been our relationship. We want to make React Native on desktop, a really great experience. We're having great success with it so far versus Electron or Messenger Desktop was. So we're going to keep pushing that forward, and we're just at the very beginning of that. But I'm excited for kind of that future.
Yeah, and that really speaks to earlier points of the extensibility of React Native. To be able to go to platforms, to be introduced to platforms that it wasn't previously on. But then also it's like flexibility, right? That it can go and like support a portion of Microsoft Office. It doesn't have to own the whole thing, and that is just really fascinating to me, that this project can kind of like go anywhere that it needs to go to help people be more productive in a wide variety of environments.
Yeah, and that's part of our focusing on massive scale principle as well. There's thousands of different screens in the React Native app, sorry, in the Facebook app. And last time I checked a couple months ago, there was like 850-ish screens in the app written in React Native. And so being able to enable existing apps have parts of it written in React Native versus the entire app having to be React Native is really critical to us.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I want to get into this last one. Was there anything else that you wanted to say on the Every platform before we move on? Cool.
No, that's great.
I realize, yeah, I've just been enjoying talking to you so much, and I realize like we've already been on for like an hour or so.
I'm happy to keep talking for a little bit longer.
Okay, cool. So the last of these principles is declarative UI. Tell me how that fits into the React Native mission.
Yeah. So I think one of the things is, well, I'll read this first. We don't believe that deploying the same exact interface on every platform. We believe that it's important to expose each platform's unique capabilities with the same kind of mental model, the same declarative programming model. And for us, our declarative programming model is React. React is like the heart and soul of what we use. It's what we use on the web. It's the mental model. It's the capabilities. It's hooks, and it's the way that you write applications. That shouldn't be tied to any specific platform. That should be the way that you write UI for any platform. And so I think it's important to specify here that React is one of React Native's principles. We're not going to diverge from React to do something different. We really want to stay aligned with React because, as I said before, we kind of see it as one and the same.
Yeah, I love that, and I think that that really ties back to the original vision. I think of was it learn once, write anywhere, that you could take React and actually apply it to all of these different platforms, which you've seen tremendous success in over the last handful of years.
Yeah. This kind of ties into the stuff I'm excited about, which I think was part of your agenda for one of our last topics.
Yes.
If we're ready for this.
Yeah, I'm totally ready. Tell us what you're excited about. I mean, what's just getting you excited now that kind of this technology seems a little bit more, fleshed out? What are the things that are on the horizon?
Yeah. So one of the things, when we talked about desktop, that's a really new thing for us. I'm really excited about that. I think there are a couple things that people might not be thinking about with desktop that are kind of interesting. For us at Facebook, iPad and Android tablets are kind of a big deal in terms of absolute number of users, but we don't have the bandwidth to really invest in that as we do for iOS and Android. But there's a lot of things that you need on desktop that are very similar. For example, on a desktop application, you might hit Tab to kind of navigate through the interface with your keyboard, and that's just what you expect from a desktop application.
Sure.
But it's not something you do on a mobile app. You don't do that really, having a touchscreen. And so as we have to kind of figure out what that means on Mac and Windows. How do you build a native application on Mac and Windows and really look and feel like that platform and expose these capabilities and APIs in React Native? And as we figure these problems out, we get to bring these solutions into React Native itself, which provides value to iOS and Android. Because you can plug a touchpad and keyboard into an iPad. You can plug a mouse and keyboard into an Android device. And you have the same kind of controls, but most things don't think about that. But because we have to build it out as a first-class citizen for desktop, we can bring it as a first-class citizen to iPad and Android. And it's not just about desktop either. Web has the same needs, right? Yes. Web needs to figure these things out. And so as we think about these APIs, what are the things that we need to do that are cross-platform? And as we talked about before, it's not just about iOS, Android, it's not just about desktop, it's about VR and TV, and you have controllers, and it's also about web. We want to make it easy so that you can build applications across all technologies using kind of 95% of the same code base and using the platform where it really matters. And so for us, on web, I think there's a lot of opportunity there, and I think that's kind of the dream that everyone's had for a long time is that an engineer who knows React in one code base, 95% of it can be the same between web and mobile.
Sure.
And I think a lot of teams externally from Facebook have really investigated this. And I think Expo is doing a great job of driving this forward and bringing a lot of these capabilities to web from React Native. But the thing that I think about is that in a lot of ways, React Native is a toolkit on top of React for building high quality experiences. React is kind of like the core of the mental model of the APIs provided. React DOM kind of exposes the low-level APIs to divs and spans and events and that kind of thing. And React Native kind of builds on top of that with the patterns and components and hooks and things that people need to build an application that's really high quality across any platform. And so I'm excited that as we build this out, we can start thinking more about web and really make this a really cool thing.
Yeah. It's funny, like as you're talking about that, I'm just thinking about how hard it is at the moment to support devices that on the web. Sorry, on the web, how difficult it is to support devices that have a keyboard, which we expect, but then also are capable of touch technologies. Because more and more devices are giving you both experiences, and it's something that we're just bad at right now. And I love this kind of virtuous cycle that React Native is already trying to figure that out, and can through figuring that out actually provide libraries and concepts and ideas to help out all of the platforms, including the web.
Yeah, something we mentioned earlier is being able to make it so that product development is more accessible to generalists and regardless of the platform. And I think that's a big piece here as well. You talk about keyboard navigation on web, and then adding touch is really hard. And you have to be an expert at these systems to be able to do that. And so for React Native, one of the things that's really important to us is trying to figure out what these patterns look like that can be more accessible to a broader swath of the developer ecosystem. There's millions of developers that know React, making them more effective in the ways that they want to work and the areas where they can have an impact and be useful is really important. And as we think about this a lot as we think about lowering the barrier to development. There's a lot of coding boot camps where people come out learning React. That's amazing. A couple of weeks of learning and people are quite productive. Are there things that we can do in React and React Native that require less expertise in the common case and make it more effective? I think we still need the experts to kind of drive the expectations and really drive these things forward, but we can kind of shift that balance and make it more accessible to more people.
I love that. I love that vision, because I think that, over the next handful of years, that is where things are going to happen, right? Like being able to give people with an idea, every opportunity to very quickly spin up that idea and prove it and actually make a product out of it, is going to be more accessible to non-programmers. And I love that you're really driving this forward, and with it, I think a unique focus on product, as opposed to just kind of more cool developer tooling that makes us feel hipper or happier, but really focusing very narrowly on how do we get from product to customer really quickly and narrow that gap. I just really love that, and I'm really excited to see that that is something that is picking up steam on more and more platforms.
Us too.
Awesome. Well, before we wrap this up, is there anything else that you had wanted to say that I didn't ask you about yet?
This has been great. Thank you so much for talking about these principles and kind of having this conversation about it. This is what I wanted.
Awesome. Well, it's what I wanted too, and I'm really grateful that you made the time to do it. I love seeing stuff like this kind of pop up on the web, because as you'd said, it really does open up an opportunity for conversation and to kind of investigate a little bit further into why is this the most important thing, and why are we kind of veering away from other things that maybe seem like just as important. So thank you for writing it and coming on the show.
Yeah, absolutely. And if other people want to have conversations about this, please tweet at me, Eli_White, and I'm sure that'll be in the show notes as well.
Yeah.
I really want to have conversations about this.
Yeah. So that brings up a good close for us is how is the best way for people to contact you, get involved in React Native development and future discussions?
Twitter is the right way to contact me. I think for following along with kind of the big changes in React Native, we have a repo called Discussions and Proposals, and that's kind of a good way to follow along. And if you mark that repo as watched, get notifications there without the volume of notifications in the main React Native repo. And a lot of the kind of big changes that are happening we discussed there.
Awesome. Well, we'll definitely link all of those things. Eli, thanks again for your time today. This has been illuminating and super fun for me.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
We did it.
Success.
Success. Thanks. I totally lost track of time, so I appreciate you being flexible on the timeline there.
Yeah, absolutely. I was like, we have 5 minutes left and 3 more of these to go through. I'm pretty excited. Like, as I said a bunch of times, that, I really think that these are meant to drive a conversation, and I'm glad that we got to like have the conversation that they needed. And I was kind of I was a little bit sad when I first published these and posted them on YouTube, on Twitter, and I was like, please talk to me about them. And it was like crickets. And we like shared them in Reddit, and it was like crickets. And I think, a lot of React Native stuff is pretty intimidating to people, like interacting with core team members, even if they say like, we want to have a discussion, they feel like they might not, be able to have that conversation, or they might not know enough, and really wanting it to feel more open. So hoping this conversation and will help drive that.
Yeah, and I hope so too, because I know that, it's very easy. For me, like, all of my stuff is like predominantly web. Like that's what I get paid to work on. And so it's easy to just kind of like not like keep up with a lot of this stuff, or like realize like how accessible it actually is. And I really do hope that some of the conversations that we had and honest questions that I had will be able to make it more, bring it nearer to some of the people like me who've wanted to dive into some of these things, but maybe haven't had the, I guess, energy yet to like actually like kind of commit to doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I kind of wanted to like make that throw out there to the other framework authors, like Swift UI and Jetpack Compose and Flutter. Like, I know they have different patterns, and people are really like, you go look at Reddit threads, and people are just like fighting over like, Flutter's bad because of Dart, or Flutter's bad because of Google, or Facebook. Like React Native is bad because like it uses JavaScript, and I think all of those are missing the point. And all of these frameworks are like really good at the things that they do, but it's not clear what they're like really driving towards. And so I'm hoping that we can kind of inspire some other people to contribute some principles here.
Yeah, I hope so too, because I just find it super informative, and like you said, it's not the end of a discussion, but the beginning of one. So I love it. I love what you're doing.
Awesome. Thank you so much for inviting me on and spending so much time with me.
Oh yeah, no, I'm glad that we finally got to do it. I've wanted to talk with you about this stuff for a while. So the principles doc was just a good excuse to actually do
Absolutely.
it. Sweet. Well, hey, yeah, I don't know exactly how much we're ahead, but it'll probably be like 3 or 4 weeks until it goes live. But I'll let you know, kind of like when we're getting close, and I will do my best to find links for anything that we mentioned that's linkable. And I'll hit you up if there's anything that I feel like maybe I missed.
Sweet. Sounds good.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Hey, thanks a ton, Eli. Thanks for your time. Appreciate it.
Talk to you next time.
Yeah. See ya. Hey, if you were watching along live, thank you so much for joining us. Hit a subscribe if you want to. Oh, I'm kind of in a weird. Get my face in there. Hit subscribe if you want to see more videos like this. And if you want to get involved in the conversations, join us live. You'll get hit the notification thing. You'll know when we're going live, and you can join our chats, ask questions if you want. Yeah, thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time we do a live recording. Cheers.